The title of this part of my drink from a fire hydrant for you is Smile When You Say That. We had Luke Skywalker earlier, so I'm bringing in Owen Wister's The Virginian. The actual line from the book is, "When you call me that, smile," but in the TV series his tagline became "Smile when you say that." And I think when you are concerned about getting our message out, nothing is more important than that. The other title for this is Close the Circle with a Smile, because I want to talk a little bit about the general problem of communication. But the most important part of it is not to get defensive or bitter just because the task that we face is so difficult. And we bring in another fictional character from space, where the android and alien, who at one point tells Sigourney Weaver and company, "I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies." And in fact, yes, the task we face is appalling, as it so often is in life, and that's no reason to get downcast. It just adds, in my view, to the excitement. And I'm haunted. There's a description of a Douglas Adams character making an appallingly unsuccessful attempt to smile good-naturedly. And sometimes that describes me a little too well. But the critical point here is we are trying to communicate a point of view that is so unpopular that we will ourselves often seem as though we have arrived recently from deep space and are talking about some planet other than the Earth, is that, first of all, if you believe that truth is on our side, it should make you happy. And the other side may have many advantages, but the fact that their position is not only wrong but frequently ludicrous is a burden I wouldn't want to be carrying up to a microphone. And the other one is the stereotype of conservatives is that we are mean, angry, probably sexually frustrated bigots with a short fuse who will start ranting if we meet with any kind of opposition. And all too often, you find that people who are trying to advance a right-wing point of view are playing exactly into that stereotype. Robert Conquest, a political scientist, one of his rules of politics is that the best way to predict the behavior of any large organization is to assume it is secretly controlled by a cabal of its enemies. And I know this is true in Ontario, that the only way you can really account for the behavior of the Progressive Conservative Party is to assume that it's actually run by the Liberal War Room. And the only reason that the Tories are in business at all is that the Liberal Party frequently behaves as though it was controlled by the Tory War Room. Just when they think they've got everything going their way, they produce some ludicrous scandal about which they speak in implausible terms. Again, Hillary Clinton with her email. You couldn't have designed that to be more embarrassing in exactly the Clintonian way. So, also, and here we'll maybe get brickbats again, but I'm going to quote from the Bible. Peter's first letter, when he says, "Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness." And it's funny, when I was originally writing a speech about this, and I remembered that, I thought it said cheerfully. Meekness, I don't know, I'm not meek, I don't do that well. But I discovered that the word meek has changed its meaning somewhat since the King James Version was done. And it used to mean, in fact, cheerful and upbeat rather than mousy. And this, I think, is extremely important, whether you are on the mainstream media as the freak conservative, or you're doing something online, or giving a talk, or in a conversation. Don't act like a mean-spirited blockhead, because that is exactly how you lose. But it doesn't matter what it is that you just said. And I think that is very, very significant. So about closing the circle now, that's another point that really is critical for everybody trying to communicate in public policy, but in many cases it's more for us than anyone else because we are thought of as being incoherent. You need to start by saying, I'm going to tell you something surprising and important. You start out with a premise. You say something odd and people go, that's so weird. And you smile and you say, stay with me. I'll show you how this works. And then you have to take them through the argument and land them back where they started. That whatever it is you said at the beginning, you must get them back there and have them go, whoa, that's weird. That actually made sense. Another thing we mustn't do is ramble and rant. Because again, we look exactly like the stereotype of a conservative in a Hollywood movie. It's no good doing that. And it's easy to get frustrated. You mentioned Winston Churchill. Well, in his book, The Gathering Storm, he says that trying to warn people in parliamentary debate and elsewhere about the dangers of Hitler was like being smothered by a feather bed. And that it can feel so much like that sometimes. It's not that anyone's actually hurting you physically, but you're just muffled and there's no oxygen and you just, it's so hopeless here. But I do find that I have somehow or other made a living at doing this for rather longer than I'm now going to admit to. And I think it is because on the whole I've been cheerful and I've tried to make sense. And I remember at one point when I was with the Reform Party, and for some reason my advice to the Reform Party was greeted with derision and anger by them. My contention that the strategy they would following would never land Preston Manning at 24 Sussex was dismissed as disloyalty. I don't know if they've changed their minds since, but I certainly haven't. We'll see who rusts first. But I said to them, very often somebody in your caucus will say something colorful, and from a conservative point of view, and the media will all go, whoa, that was weird, let's interview that guy. And whenever it happened, the leader's office would shut them down. They would apologize on their behalf, say he didn't mean that. And so I used to tell them, look, Reformer Says Right-Wing Thing is a one-day news story. And you get their attention, you get the microphone, you can explain it and find out there's a lot of people who agree with you. Reformer says something so right-wing he himself immediately runs and hides under the bed is a story that will never die and will never do you any good. So yes, you do think things that are at odds with the mainstream. Don't pretend you don't, because some liberal pollster has told you it's not playing well. And again, you talk about getting a political party of our own. And, something like the Wild Rose Party, obviously this tells you what good is having a political party of your own. And yet, you find not just with them, but also with the Harper Tories, they still feel obliged to talk like conservatives. And there's a reason why they need to do that. And that's because there's a lot of conservatism out there. There is a great appetite for this stuff, provided you present it cheerfully and coherently. There's no getting around these obligations, but they are out there. And one of the things that is wrong when conservatives try to be liberals is that they simply come across as dishonest conservatives, which carries all the baggage of conservatism and the baggage of dishonesty. And why would you want to do that? I mean, it's interesting when I mentioned this thing about the afterlife changing your calculations, and there were people went into high dudgeon. I did not say in those remarks that I believe in an afterlife, nor did I say that I was a Christian, and yet nevertheless I was immediately not merely suspected of these things, but convicted and punished. In fact, both are true, but it's no good to go around saying, oh, no, I'm not one of those, or saying, oh, no, I'm not pro-life. You wind up with the Harper people trying to shut up the pro-life caucus, which dismays the pro-lifers, and doesn't convince anybody on the other side that there isn't a strong respect for the sanctity of human life in the caucus and in the voting base. So why run from it? As George Washington once said, we should erect a standard to which the wise and honest may repair. Now, being a good conservative, he didn't say will repair. Washington was perfectly aware that catastrophe might await them, but at least may repair. And again, I used to quote that to the Reformers, which made them all move away from me there on the bench, along with the aphorism, you can't steal second base with 1 foot planted on first. For goodness sakes, find the courage of your convictions. And they found the courage of terminating my contract when it was after the first 6 months. But that's what we need to be doing, because nothing else is going to work. I'm not promising this will work either. I mean, I'm a conservative. I understand that disaster stalks the human race. But that doesn't mean we're not supposed to try. And it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to have fun doing it. And it is fun. And one of the things about moral relativism, well, one of the courses I teach at the University of Ottawa is a seminar on slavery. Another one I teach is the pre-revolutionary survey, and I talk about what we're going to discuss in the course and my admiration for American liberty, but my awareness that there is this terrible flaw and that we're going to face this, frankly, hideous as it is, because history is full of sharp bits that will poke you. And then I say, a lot of you have probably been raised on the idea that there's no truth and it's all relative, but I don't think any of you believe that about the pro-slavery argument. And I've never seen a hand yet.
I've seen many.
Well, you have weird students.
Yes.
But the other thing is people say, well, all opinions are equally valid. And I say, does that include the opinion that all opinions aren't equally valid? And, this is easy. This is like shooting fish in a barrel, which is a metaphor I also never understood. Whoever shot a fish in a barrel and why? What, he got the fish? What are you doing, making fish and lead soup? But again, it ought to be fun. I mean, it's going to be frustrating. Yeah, we're, mankind perishes and the world grows dark, that kind of thing. Again, there's a line in Chesterton's Ballad of Whitehorse about King Alfred when things are looking especially grim and he prays and the Virgin Mary appears to him and says, I have nothing for your comfort nor for your desire save that the sky grows darker and the sea grows higher. And I think to myself, if Alfred could rally his men and retake London from the Danes, we shouldn't be looking too downcast. And don't forget, the Allies did win World War II, which had no business happening. I wouldn't trade this for the 1930s in a moment. And I'll say one thing about radical Islam. Another of my rules of thumb in history is do not attack the Anglosphere. It has been tried, from Philip II to Louis XIV to Napoleon to Hitler to Brezhnev, and the smoking ruins of those regimes that have thought the English-speaking world was soft, decadent, and unready for combat litter history. I'm not saying to be complacent. We better look out. We've got enemies, and they are not kidding. But they better understand, too, the resilience that exists in a free society. That is another thing that is on our side, and it should make us happy. It should make us cheerful. We've got the good news. And again, I'm making another theological point here. People ask me if I'm an optimist. I say no. Optimism is a psychological condition and a generally fatuous one. But hope is a theological virtue. And I am hopeful. One of those things, you ask how long do we have? And ask Link Byfield. Right? It's not just a question of how each of us. None of us knows if we'll be alive next week. Suppose we're not, or suppose we die in a year or 2 years, and the battle's not won. Does that mean our life was futile? Does that mean we did not do that which we should have done? No, not at all. You put your shoulder to the wheel, and you try to advance it, or sometimes all you do is you slow the rate at which it is going in the wrong direction, and you do it with good cheer, and you have done the right thing. And part of that, again, and this pertains a bit to the music. I was reading somebody writing in Cardus about the culture wars, and they said they didn't really like this metaphor very much. It was too belligerent, it was too hostile, it was too negative. He said culture care is what we should be engaged in. If we value the culture, we shouldn't be going around saying, oh, it's all so terrible, and oh, look at this, and oh, look at that, though certainly we ought to be drawing attention to these things, but we should be making sure that we're doing it right. And one example, have you seen? There's a thing you can find on the internet. It's so old that it refers to videotape, but it's a song about what's in the Quran. And these guys, I can't sing at all, so I won't even begin to imitate, but the little bouncing ball goes as they cheerfully explain why they commit all these atrocities, and it's all in the Quran. This is fighting back with a smile. And it's terribly effective. And if you go and look this thing up and watch it, that little tune will be bopping through your head, even if you're a non-musical. This thing will be with you for days afterward. All of this is on our side, and all of this should make us cheerful. It's a tactical requirement, but I also think it's a strategic and even a metaphysical one. To do our best to be happy with what we're doing, because, Damon Runyon said all life is 6 to 5 against, right? And in the end, the sun will swallow the earth. We know this is where it ends. But that doesn't stop us from planting flowers, does it? It doesn't prevent us from trying to get across to people what the meaning of life really is and how it connects up to sound public policy. And I do think you made a point about the politically correct being negative people, and I do agree with this, though they scream about justice, the look on their face. Somebody talked about these student organizations with their manifestos that read like ransom notes. And there is a terrifying grimness about political correctness, what George Orwell called the masochistic left. But again, that puts people off. The politically correct have some good tunes, but they've also got some really jarring notes, and we should not sink to their level, because then we throw away an advantage that is natural to us, that there is more positive in our message than theirs. Why would we get dragged down to their level? For any reason, including the raw tactical consideration that it hurts us. Because especially people think of conservatism as mean-spirited anyway, because part of our message is the law of unintended consequences, this concern that good intentions are not enough. It's one of the great differences between the conservative and radical point of view. I owe this to Thomas Sowell in A Conflict of Visions, is the emphasis on wishes on the left, if I'm allowed to use that term, and on methods on the right. And I contrast the bumper stickers. Visualize world peace. You know how this person votes, right? Peace through strength. You also know how this person votes. Visualize world peace is about intentions. Peace through strength is about methods. And so we're often in the position of coming along and saying, well, that sounds pretty, but let me explain to you what's going to happen. And that can be a little bit grim. But again, it has the virtue of being true, and then it clears away methods that actually fail so that we can try something that might work. And that's good, because people like things that work. Failure is a bad thing. And part of what's wrong with political correctness is it is so destructive that they know what they hate, but there's no building there. Their communities are fake communities. Their compassion is fake compassion. None of that is really any good. And as somebody once said about political correctness, what will destroy it is that you can't tell satire from the real thing. And again, that's a cavernous weakness on their part. And it's just incumbent on us not to have the same thing become true of conservatism. That we start acting like the parody of conservatism, then we become the satire. And we don't want to do that, and we don't need to do that. As I said about Sun News Network, I'm as upset as anyone that Sun News Network failed because they were paying most of my salary. This was not a great day in my life. Also, I was actually also writing for the Sun chain, and part of my argument was, well, how often do you lose 2 jobs in one day? In my case, the answer is at least once, because the Sun suspended all their freelancers the same day the network folded. Oh well, that was. I don't know. This Friday the 13th has gone a lot better, I got to say. Friday the 13th is on an upsurge as far as I'm concerned. But so we had a tool that I liked for an important job, and the tool broke in my hand. So I better find another tool and carry on. Thanks to having married a woman smarter than myself, we got that Kickstarter campaign underway, and so we had something else going on. And when people ask me, what are you going to do next, I say, I'm doing it. And it's not just about raising money by going directly to the people rather than through the subsidy route and the regulated broadcaster. It's getting the documentary out that way. And I got a lot of funny looks. People say, well, that's not a distribution plan. You need to get it on a network. So it'll be on one night, and people will switch off if they're CBC, go, what the heck, I don't want to hear about Magna Carta. But we're going to get it into people's hands so they can show it and share it again and again. We'll put it online, put it on The Rebel, I think, and just get it out there, because there is another way and there is a better way, and we are going to make it happen. We are going to find the outlets. We're going to find the tools. We're going to communicate. And again, you talk about doing this stuff at the dinner table. And my friend John Patrick, who's with the Christian Medical and Dental Association in Ottawa, and he was talking one time, he gave a talk about the exile of Israel. And the fact that after Israel is destroyed by the Romans and the Jews are wandering for hundreds and hundreds of years, you'll find Jews. So you don't find any Assyrians on the streets of New York. And then after more than 1,800 years, you could reassemble Israel and revive the Hebrew language. Why? He said, because they obeyed the injunction to teach your children at the dining room table. And then he said, do you think that if Canadians were dispersed for 18 centuries, you could then reassemble them based on the Charter of Rights? And again, I wouldn't want to try and spread political correctness at the dinner table, not just because I don't believe in political correctness, but also because I believe in happy meal times. I fail to see how this could possibly be any good for anybody. Are we up against it? Yeah, absolutely we're up against it. Just the same way that Alfred the Great was up against it when he fled into the marshes of Athelney, or the Saxons were when Edmund Ironside was killed in 1016, something I have not entirely recovered from to this day. The barons who took on John at Magna Carta, that was a desperate gamble. Trying to oppose Henry VIII, standing up to Charles I, the people who made the American Revolution. No, there are no end of these stories in history. The weird thing is how often they turn out well. And again, bring up another characters out of fiction. I don't know if there are Tolkien fans in the room, people who enjoy The Lord of the Rings. And you may or may not know about Alfred the Great, and if you don't, you should, that after the Danes ambushed him at Christmas in 876, almost killed him, he fled into the marshes, and the Alfred and the Cake story supposedly happened. He assembles his forces, gathers his thanes, the men of Mercia. They rally at a place called Egbert's Stone. And from Egbert's Stone, they beat the Danes, force the Danish king to convert, recapture London and all that. And when you read the scene at the Stone of Erech in The Lord of the Rings, when they pass through the underneath the mountain, the Blackroot Vale, and they summon the ghosts to fight for them, obviously Tolkien is drawing heavily on what happened in Anglo-Saxon England. But Tolkien is also telling a story that is ludicrously improbable, of the victory of good over evil. And of course, The Lord of the Rings is fiction, so it's preposterous. But Tolkien was trying to tell something important about the world. The Lord of the Rings is a very metaphysical trilogy about the meaning of life and of the triumph of virtue over evil. And I've often said about the Second World War that if it hadn't happened and you'd written it, your epic trilogy, and you sent it off to a publisher, they'd have rejected it, possibly indignantly. This is ludicrous, they'd have said. This is too over the top. I mean, this Hitler Nobody would believe a villain like that. Come off it, you got to tone this down a little bit. And the victory at Dunkirk, I mean, that's never going to happen. What's that about, And the Poles smuggling out the Enigma machine, the Battle of Britain, the victory at El Alamein, or the American victory at Midway, this business with the USS Yorktown. I mean, please, our readers have some discernment, Except World War II really did happen. And we really did win the Cold War. Remember how bad things looked in the 1970s? It seemed to be all over. The West had lost its resilience. Now we have a new set of challenges here, and in some ways I find them worse. I'm very concerned about the state of the family, for instance. And I think social conservatives who don't talk about that are giving up something very important. Because young people know there's a problem. People who've grown up in modern society are hungering for something they know they haven't got. It's like people who've only ever eaten junk food. They can't tell you what they want to eat because they've never seen it on their plate. But there was an interesting poll that showed that young people in Canada overwhelmingly have the ambition to get married and stay married. But they don't have the tools. However, they've got the desire, and that's a desire that most conservatives strongly share. And we have a story about how the world can be like that. How you can raise children with the person you fell in love with when you were young. How you can be with them through your life. That beats anything the other side has to offer. And we have a vision like Mark Milke was talking about, all these measures that intend to help the poor but don't. And we can point out there and say, we've had big government for 50 or 60 years now, all done with the sincerest of intentions to help the poor, and you have this rising income inequality, you have this terrifying gulf opening up between those at the top who are doing very well and those at the bottom who are doing terribly, including, by the way, if you look at statistics on the breakup of marriage. Well, the people at the top are getting married and staying married. It's the people at the bottom whose family life is chaotic. And of course, this further disadvantages their children. Well, we are filled with compassion, and we can point to methods that aren't working and say, isn't the definition meant to be doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result? Why are you all suggesting that what hasn't worked will work if we do it again? It's like that thing out of Rocky and Bullwinkle, when Bullwinkle's saying, hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of this hat. He says, oh, Bullwinkle, this trick never works. This time for sure. And every time he pulls out a tiger, a lion, or a rhinoceros. We are actually in a position of having a philosophy that is much less ridiculous, of having policy proposals that might actually work. The problem is, one last point on a slightly more negative, we don't put them forward. We are trying to fight an enemy with outposts inside our own heads. Another thing I used to tell the reformers. If you believe that the other side is right, and you say they're right, and then you say you shouldn't vote for them, you don't win elections. This just happened with the Ontario Tories, by the way. The Liberals set a trap for them. They said, will you debate us on climate change? Because there are some people in the Tory caucus who, like myself, think that this theory of man-made climate change is hooey. And the Tories, oh no, none of us doubt that. We're going to vote for this motion. What an idiotic waste of time. And then how are you going to oppose the agenda driven by the notion that CO2 is setting the sky on fire? If man-made global warming were happening the way the alarmists say it is, it would be absolutely imperative to follow their prescription. And yet you concede the premise, and then you try to dispute the conclusion, or even just win the election anyway. And you wind up looking like a snake. It's like, we all know you don't really believe it. You're just lying, and you're not going to do anything about it if you get elected. What the heck kind of platform is that? It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, I would take that debate in a heartbeat. I'd love to debate Kathleen Wood on global warming because she doesn't know anything about the history of the Earth's climate. You get her on the Maunder Minimum and the Little Ice Age and the Younger Dryas. She hasn't got a clue about any of it. Never heard of it. I'm game, and I'll go in there and I'll smile and say, here's the temperature of the Earth over the last 500 million years. Notice anything strange? It's all over the place, and it has nothing to do with CO2. So do you, Premier, believe that the laws of physics changed in 1940? Because one of the fundamental rules of science is not to suggest that cause and effect work differently now than they used to. If that happened, you can't read the fossil record, you can't read anything, because you never know. Gravity might have changed, or time might run backwards in certain points in Earth's history. That's not science, that's voodoo. So I'll come back to where I started, because I promised to close the circle and smile while saying it. You've got to have something to say that makes sense. Make a surprising claim, back it up, and bring the reader home. And you do it with a smile. You don't hide from who and what you are. You don't concede for tactical purposes that the other guys are right and then try to win strategically. This never works. You just look like a dishonest, wretched character. And you want to have fun, okay? That thing that the hippies say, we're here for a good time, not a long time. Well, I'll take the long time too, but for heaven's sakes, let's be here for a good time and fight the good fight as though it was the good fight.